It was called the Great War, a conflict so devastating that people believed there could never be another like it. Millions of lives were lost, empires crumbled, and the world was forever changed. But how did it all begin? What drove nations into one of the bloodiest conflicts in history? And how did World War I set the stage for an even greater catastrophe just 2 decades later? Buckle up, because today, we're diving into the entire history of World War I. To understand World War I, we have to go back to the early 20th century. Europe was a tense place, like a room filled with gasoline, one spark away from explosion. Nations were forming alliances, arming themselves, and competing for dominance. The major players? Britain, France, and Russia on one side, the Triple Entente, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy on the other, the Triple Alliance. But despite this uneasy peace, war seemed inevitable. Then, on June 28, 1914, the spark finally came. The heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, was assassinated in Sarajevo by a Serbian nationalist. Austria-Hungary, furious, blamed Serbia and declared war. But Serbia had a powerful ally, Russia. As Austria mobilized, Russia stepped in. Then Germany, allied with Austria, declared war on Russia. France joined to support Russia. Germany then invaded Belgium to attack France, dragging Britain into the war. Within weeks, most of Europe was in chaos. It was no longer a regional dispute. This was war on a global scale. By late 1914, both sides dug in, literally. The Western Front, stretching from Belgium to Switzerland, became a brutal stalemate. Soldiers lived in trenches, knee-deep in mud, plagued by rats, disease, and the constant threat of enemy fire. Letters from soldiers describe the horrors: men barely sleeping, artillery shells raining down, gas attacks turning the air into poison. Some spent months in these trenches, only to advance a few hundred meters before being pushed back again. It was a war of attrition, where victory seemed impossible. 1916 saw some of the bloodiest battles in history. The Battle of Verdun, where the French and Germans fought for nearly a year, resulted in over 700,000 casualties. The German strategy? Lead France white, inflict so many losses that France would collapse. But the French, under General Pétain, stood firm, repeating the phrase, "They shall not pass." The destruction was unimaginable. Entire villages wiped off the map. Then came the Battle of the Somme. On the first day alone, Britain lost nearly 60,000 men. Imagine entire towns losing all their young men in a single day. And for what? A few miles of land. Meanwhile, in the east, the war played out differently. The Eastern Front saw sweeping battles across vast landscapes. Russia, despite its massive army, suffered terrible defeats against Germany's superior tactics. The war drained Russia's economy, fueling unrest back home. By 1917, this would lead to the Russian Revolution, pulling Russia out of the war and changing global history. And the war wasn't confined to Europe. Fighting erupted in Africa, as colonial powers dragged their territories into battle. The Middle East saw the Arab Revolt against the Ottoman Empire, led in part by T.E. Lawrence, better known as Lawrence of Arabia. Even Asia was involved, with Japan seizing German-held islands in the Pacific. Back on the home front, civilians suffered greatly. Food shortages, rationing, and economic collapse took a toll on ordinary people. Women stepped into new roles, working in factories, driving ambulances, and serving as nurses. Many countries gave women the right to vote after the war, recognizing their contribution. Propaganda filled newspapers, urging people to support the war effort, while poets and writers captured the horror and futility of it all. At first, the United States stayed out, but Germany made a fatal mistake: the infamous Zimmermann telegram. In 1917, Germany sent a secret message to Mexico, promising support if they attacked the U.S. British intelligence, intercepted it, and handed it to America. That, along with unrestricted submarine warfare, pushed the U.S. to declare war on Germany. Fresh American troops and supplies tipped the scales. The endgame had begun. By 1918, Germany was exhausted. Its allies, Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire, were collapsing. The German people, starving and tired of war, demanded peace. On November 11, 1918, at 11 a.m., the guns finally fell silent. An armistice was signed, marking the end of the war. But the peace treaty that followed, the Treaty of Versailles, would lay the groundwork for the next great conflict. What do you think? Could war have been avoided? And did the world learn from its mistakes? Let us know in the comments.